Good evening, members and officers who are with us tonight, and any other invited guests for this evening. First thing is to welcome you to this joint meeting of Scrutiny being held via Microsoft Teams on Thursday, the 21st of October, 2021. It's just gone 5 o'clock, so we're here to consider the matters in the following agenda. Councillors and public wishing to speak on any item can do so by making a request to the chair. You're also welcome to use Welsh at the meeting. Both these requests require a minimum notice of period of 3 days. I don't think we've had any requests for Welsh tonight. Sharon, is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
Okay, thanks, members. Go to the agenda. This meeting will be recorded and made available to view via the Council's website, except for discussions involving confidential or exempt items. Therefore, the images and audio of those individuals speaking will be publicly available to all by the recording on the Council website at www.caerphilly.gov.uk. First thing for this evening is to receive apologies for absence. Are we any other apologies apart from the ones that we can see not on the screen?
Chair, we've had apologies from Councillor Andrews, Councillor John Bevan, Councillor Charlotte Bishop, Councillor Colin Ellsbury, Councillor Mark Evans, Councillor Christine Forehead, Councillor Rob Goff, Councillor David Hardacre, Councillor Adrian Hussey, Councillor Barbara Jones, Councillor Steve Kent, Councillor Gaynor Oliver, Councillor Denver Priest, Councillor Diane Price, and Councillor John Scriban, Councillor John Taylor, and Councillor Carl Thomas.
Okay, thank you, Sharon. Members who are present, do we have any other apologies that you know of that weren't just mentioned?
Can I
Councillor
just say,
Cushing.
Councillor Scrivens was just in the Steve Scrivens was just in the meeting, but he's disappeared now.
I saw his photo, his picture earlier.
It was it was Councillor John Scriven.
Oh, sorry, misheard.
Okay, then I think it was Stephen. Okay, Steve. Okay, then thanks, members. We now move on to declarations of interest. Councillors and officers some tapping there, are reminded of their personal responsibility to declare any personal and or prejudicial interest in respect of any item of business on this agenda, in accordance with the Local Government Act 2000, Council's Constitution, and the Code of Conduct for both councillors and officers. Members, are there any declarations of interest? None? Okay. Thank you very much for that. And we now seem to have made contact again with the chair this evening. John, are you happy now to take over? Now I've done all the hard work?
Yes, thank you, Mike, and apologies, members. Yeah, as so often, we're having fun and games at this end, you know, trying to make contact. Yes, so I've come in. Forgive me, Mike. I just picked up the last of your sentence. Did you say we'd gone through apologies for absence? We have. Yes, okay. That was and unfortunately it was a longer list than we would hope, because this is an important meeting for all members. And we've just done the declarations of interest, and there weren't any declared, John. So we're on item number 3, which is the minutes of the Joint Scrutiny Committee held on the 22nd of February 21. Thanks, Mike. Would you do me the honour of just taking us through the minutes, and I'll join for agenda item 4, so I can be certain I'm going to be here and safe, okay? That's okay. Thanks a lot. You could do that. Right, so we're at agenda item 3. So we'll go through now for accuracy, members. Page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4.
and page 5.
I move, Chair.
Okay. I've got one thing to bring up actually on that very thing. I am not shown in the councillors who were present that evening, but I was here, as can be proved by the fact that on declarations of interest that evening, I did actually declare an interest of my own against agenda item 5 that night. So if we can just put the attendees list with one extra name, Sharon? Okie doke.
Yes, that's noted, Chair.
Okay, thanks. Now, John, over to you then for the first.
Chair needs to be moved and seconded.
Oh, yes, of course.
I second, Chair.
Yeah.
Councillor Walter Williams.
Yeah. And is that moved? And was that a mover or a second?
I
John?
moved it, Chair.
Okay. Right.
Councillor
Okay.
Walter Williams, second.
Yeah.
Seconded.
Right. Thank you very much. So we've now already got the voting panel up on forms. So if
Chair,
all-
sorry
Yep.
to stop you, but I was confused between yourself and John coming in.
sorry.
I've got a query on one part. I'm not sure which page it is now, but it's about members welcoming proposal to increase park and ride provision. That's a fairly general statement, and as a lot of members probably know, there are different proposals, and let's say some are more welcome than others in the community. So I don't know what that actually covers, that particular sentence.
The park and ride, members also welcome proposals to increase park and ride provision.
Yeah.
That's from Braddock. I think the increase was to look into actually making it a larger space.
Well,
Because
it
we're
probably
not-
should
we're
say
not in-
probably should
yeah.
say within reason, Chair.
Well,
Because
yeah.
there's anything from 200 places to 1,000 places, and it won't be a surprise to anyone that either 500 or 1,000 spaces is not exactly welcome within the community. So I don't know whether a note could be made of that, Chair. It's the
Chair, I mean, all I would say is also the video recording is available on the website. So if members wanted to see the detail of the discussion, they could also look at the video.
There we are. That
okay.
gives us the opportunity, Colin, to have a look at that. And if there are any need for changes to it in the wording, in the emphasis, whatever, I'm sure we can do that following that.
Obviously, my comments for this evening will be on the recording, won't they?
As well, on tonight's recording, yeah. Okay then, if members can now vote for, against or abstain on the minutes that we've just been discussing, the panel is there for you on forms. Thank you.
Just to say, Chair, I have abstained on the basis of my comment.
That's okay. That is okay. Has everyone now voted? Anyone who is with us just by audio, would you like to make your vote known? That doesn't seem necessary.
That's
Okay.
carried, Chair.
Thank you all. Okay, John, I will now hand over to you as the proper chair for the evening.
Thank you, Mike, and I appreciate that. And apologies again, members, for the disruption that this is causing. So we're now moving on to agenda item 4, which is the homelessness plan, and it will be introduced by our cabinet member, Councillor Lisa Phipps.
Yep, thank you very much, Chair. Good afternoon, members. The report in front of you this evening is to inform you of the homeless project plan that has been set for the Housing Solutions team for the period 2021-2022, based on the current identified key service area priorities to enhance the service. The Housing Solutions team have been working to deliver the service in line with the Housing Wales Act 2015 and the Gwent Homeless Strategy 2018 to 2022, which has historically focused on the prevention of homelessness rather than it being crisis-led. However, as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, the service moved to a crisis-led model in order to meet the increase in demand for assistance. This Homeless Project Plan now sets out the service area priorities that will allow the Housing Solutions Service to review and refocus on the prevention of homelessness. As you will see from the report, some of the Homeless Project Plan objectives are to be proactive and provide an accessible service, to focus on prevention, to reduce and address rough sleeping, to address the use of emergency accommodation, and to develop partnership multi-agency working. Members are asked to note the content of the report and plan to ensure that they are informed of the service area priorities outlined in the Homeless Project Plan. Kerry Denman, the Housing Solutions Manager and the author of the report, is available on the call should members have any questions or queries. And can I, Chair, take this opportunity to thank Kerry and others within the Housing Solutions team for all their hard work. There was an increase in homeless presentations and referrals from March 2020 as a direct result of the COVID-19 pandemic and the directive from Welsh Government that no one should be sleeping out. The Housing Solutions team addressed this increase and supported over 1,000 people into emergency temporary accommodation, and more continue to be supported each day. So thank you very much, Kerry and her team. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Lisa. And I want to reiterate that as well. I shall do again at the end of this discussion. But if we'd like to hand over to Kerry now, if you'd like to take us through the report, thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Councillor Phipps, and thank you very much, Councillor Ridgewell. I've kind of pulled out in terms of the report the key objectives that I feel we should discuss in a little bit more detail this afternoon, and that's 5.7, which is the focus on prevention. When I joined Caerphilly back in February 2021, one of the first things that myself and the team discussed was the need for us to refocus and realign ourselves with Welsh Government's directive that prevention is key. So what we've started to do is review the pathways that we have available to us to deliver preventative measures to prevent people from becoming homeless. This includes working with a number of agencies that include our Citizens Advice Bureau, so we can maximise and support people with debt and rent arrears, particularly given as we've moved through the COVID transition where furlough has come to an end, and we're aware that debt now is a prominent issue amongst a large proportion with our community. It's working with partner agencies like that in social services to ensure that we're fully abreast and kept updated with individuals' need. It's working with agencies that sit outside of the local authority, which can include health, police, probation, in order to maximise risk management of any individuals, and ensuring that where possible, some of the most vulnerable people who could be released from custody, where they may have had accommodation on reception into custody, are being considered to sustain that accommodation, and reinforcing pathways available to negotiate with landlords to keep that accommodation open for them. In addition to that, what we have done is implement some updated staff training to ensure that they refresh their pathways and are aware of the preventative measures. And we've had the introduction of the Tenancy Hardship Grant from Welsh Government to support people in the private sector of where they've been impacted financially through COVID-19 and are now in rent arrears, to try and support them in sustaining those tenancies. Our long-term objective will tie very nicely into what we are now taking forward in 2022, which will be a rapid rehousing transitional plan, of where the purpose of rapid rehousing is that we will have an adequate move-on process through accommodation, not only for those in temporary accommodation, but for those who are in stable accommodation but could become at risk, to avoid them ever having to come through a homelessness service. Aside from the focus on prevention, one of the major aspects that I had to tackle when I joined Caerphilly County Borough Council was that of rough sleeping. So I would draw your attention to 5.8 within the report with regards to rough sleepers. Currently, and having completed our return for last month, we've seen an increase again in rough sleeping within the borough, and having had a number of discussions with local authorities across Wales in the last couple of weeks, this has become apparent across all local authorities. So What we're looking to do is target and understand, and what we've started to collect and report back to Welsh Government is more detail around the root cause of why people are rough sleeping. That has allowed us as a service to start to consider future delivery in terms of the type of accommodation that we may need within the borough to address some of their need. What has become apparent is some of the individuals rough sleeping are individuals who have complex needs, who have been through a number of accommodation units, and the current style of accommodation that we have, whether that be general needs accommodation or supported accommodation, are still not suitable for some individuals to be able to manage that type of accommodation. In addition to that, what we're looking at doing is providing a potential specific housing solutions officer who will be tasked with supporting our outreach team in going out and actively engaging on site rough sleepers to understand what their wishes and wants are, so that we can better going forward start to plan for that future need. In conjunction with that, and as touched on with rough sleepers, what I will be bringing forward next year in 2022 will be our rapid rehousing plan, and I will draw your attention to 5.9. All local authorities have now been asked by Welsh Government to draft a rapid rehousing transitional plan for submittance by June 2022. This rapid rehousing plan will set out Caerphilly County Borough Council's 5-year strategy of how we will address homelessness within the borough, and that cause of homelessness will include all of our vulnerable client groups, but it will also incorporate our housing first models. As part of the rapid rehousing agenda, we will be expecting legislative reform across all of the housing services, and therefore at some future point there will be discussion around how we incorporate that into our allocations policy, and those reports will be presented to future committees in 2022, following us undertaking a number of consultations across a number of service areas and with a number of both stakeholder and statutory and non-statutory agencies. In addition to that, what we will be doing and what we've started to do is review our emergency accommodation provision. We recognise that as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, Caerphilly County Borough Council was very much forced overnight to move to utilising bed and breakfast accommodation, which we fully appreciate and recognise that that is not sustainable and is not suitable for the number of individuals residing in that accommodation. Now that we've had some time to breathe, what we're starting to review and undertake is an analysis of individuals' needs within that accommodation, so that we're able to work with both our supporting people teams, our strategy and new development teams for future development around that type of accommodation that we need. In addition to that, what we need to be considering is how we maximise access into the private rented sector. Through our homelessness duties, we have the statutory ability to discharge duty into that sector, and for many it can be a viable option. So as I draw your attention to 5.12, our Caerphilly Quays project has currently, which is our private rented sector service, has over 100 properties from landlords across the borough that they have allowed us to work with those landlords and secure accommodation for homeless households. The team have worked very hard throughout the pandemic and have managed to increase that portfolio with an additional 5 units of accommodation that have allowed us to accommodate 5 households that they've moved and presented through the service during that pandemic. We have recently launched a website for the Caerphilly Quays service. The objective of that is to now be on that Google or search engine platform. So if landlords are looking at how they can best market or identify tenants, we've now provided that platform. The service that we offer is at no cost to us as the local authority and is at no cost to the landlord. The landlord essentially allows us to access their property and accommodate a homeless household. And then what we provide is a level of support and, where necessary, Department of Work and Pensions intervention to resolve any benefit issues and address any tenancy or rent arrear issues to sustain that accommodation. They're the key aspects of the report that I would like to have highlighted to you today, and I would now welcome any questions.
Thank you very much, Kerry. It's a detailed report, and you've given us a comprehensive presentation, which I'm sure we will appreciate. I know there will be questions from members, so members.
There are a couple already.
Thanks very much indeed. I'd be grateful, Mike, because of my dodgy system, if you could tell me who they are, because
I'm keeping an eye on
struggling.
it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Who was first, Mike?
Well, it's actually changing about with the hands down. Councillor Steve Skivens is at the top of my list at the moment.
Right. Just trying to switch my mic back on. Right. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Right. I can't get the camera to come back on for some reason, but that may be a blessing. Can I firstly thank you for the report. I am absolutely delighted to see a change in strategy to prevention and looking at the causation and triggers. The effect of having to find emergency and temporary accommodation during the COVID crisis is a cul-de-sac, in as much as with the growth in homelessness, we will eventually, as an organisation, fail to meet that demand. So we have to change our strategy, as well as the legislation that's been brought through. It is right and proper that we, as a caring authority, change our strategy and look at prevention and look at the triggers. When you start to look into this issue, the triggers are not obvious to everybody. Bereavements, loss of employment, expulsion from school, family breakup, and so on and so forth can all be triggers. And I do have some questions, but I am extremely pleased to see this change in strategy coming through, and look forward to the results. If I could indulge a few questions. Do we actually know the level in all its different formats of the amount of homeless people that are within? I know that homeless people are quite often transient, but do we actually know how many people we've got in the authority area which are homeless? With sofa surfers, people staying with families and networks in temporary accommodation. When was the last time we looked at the number?
I mean, we report to Welsh Government on a quarterly basis in terms of that data. So what I can certainly do, if you would like me to, is to break that down and send that to you via email, because obviously we provide a collective, and that is caught over a number of different client groups. Yeah, because in doing a bit of research on this issue and looking at what a number of the charities are saying, is that there is huge underreporting, and that will probably be prevalent in our own area, but certainly up and down the country, there's huge underreporting of what the true figure is. And then obviously the next extrapolation from there is any strategy which we set up has to be based against the actuals that we see in, and those figures might not be correct. I think in terms of the underreporting, I'm in agreement with you there. For us, it's quite a challenge, because while we report on, as part of our breakdown, the number of people who've presented to us as sofa surfing, we're still reliant on that presentation. And it's that age old of, we're still fully aware as local authorities that there is that what we call the hidden homeless, so the people who still sofa surf but don't engage with agencies. And I think that that's where the refocus around prevention comes from. It's that age old saying of, homelessness does not start in the homelessness services, it starts elsewhere. It starts in the local GP surgeries, it starts in the schools, and it's those agencies that we are looking to target in terms of those referral pathways, so that we can become aware of young people, where they may be living in homes that are breaking down, and what interventions need to be implemented for us to tackle that. We're having discussions at the moment around how we roll out some kind of workshops in schools, subject to COVID restriction, etc., to tackle some of these issues and to make people aware about where these pathways are. How do we break down some of the barriers in those agencies of where we are aware that perhaps they may become first aware around somebody's accommodation issue? Okay.
Okay. Steve, we've got quite a few names already. Would you mind if I go to them and I can call you back?
Well, if I could just
Is it related? Go on then.
Mentioned, Chair. I probably should declare a professional interest in that. I'm a long-term trustee with Caerphilly Citizens Advice Bureau and covering Blaenau Gwent. But yes, I do have some more questions. So if you could either come back to me after others.
Let's give people a fair chance, and you may well have the same questions asked anyway. If you can take your hand down for the moment, and I will remember you.
Mike, I think I'm back in again, so I'm happy to take it on. Thank you so much.
The next one then is Teresa Parry. John.
Yeah, thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Kerry, for your presentation. Steve has covered a few of the things that I was going to say. I am very pleased that we're looking at prevention, absolutely, and the triggers. It's not just adverse childhood experiences that bring people to being homeless. My question was about how many remain in a bed and breakfast accommodation. I know you've said you're going to give some information to Councillor Steve Scrivens via email, but could I ask if that could be sent out to all of us as well?
Well, in terms of bed and breakfast figures, I can confirm that now. Our end of September return for Welsh Government confirms that we've got 281 households currently in temporary accommodation. The breakdown of that data is what I will share in terms of how many then do we have on top of that who may be sofa surfing. So that figure is specific to who is currently occupying our emergency interim accommodation.
Thank you very much. That's lovely.
Thank you, Teresa. Thank you. Kerry, if I may, just quickly coming in there, it was a question I wanted to pose as well. So forgive me, members, for just interjecting, but it's relevant at this juncture. Are you able to give us the actual figures on bed and breakfast currently, or is that something you still need to go back and extrapolate out?
I would have to extrapolate that out because we've got obviously various forms of actual temporary accommodation, but I can certainly do that and send that to you. Okay,
that's fine. And members, can I just remind everybody to keep their mics off if they're not actually asking questions?
Can I call you back because I'm in a meeting?
Yeah, no worries, Tom. There we are.
Sorry about that.
Is Councillor Savalis next?
It is, yes. John. Roy, you're on next. I have to put the phone down.
Trying to unmute. I'm unmuted now, yeah? My question on a similar vein, I mean, all aspects of homelessness are very worrying and concerning. I think that's possibly the ones that I really see and draw my attention and concern are those people that are rough sleepers, where mainly I've seen them in the cities. I haven't seen many in Caerphilly, but obviously from the report they do exist. Are we dealing with a continually increasing number, or is it a situation where people that are rough sleeping, unfortunately, in many ways are doing out of choice due to the fact that they're involved with drugs or other unfortunate habits?
That's a very good question to pose, and I think that what I would say is there's a lot of reasons why. So, you know, in terms of our return to Welsh Government, what we have identified within Caerphilly is that we've got a couple of individuals who unfortunately have been through all of our forms of accommodation, and as a result of consistent behavioural, where it's significant behaviour where we've had to ask them to leave because of the risk that they've posed to others. But what we are finding is that we're having individuals who don't want to engage with services. So we've currently, in terms of our reporting, got 9 individuals in the borough who are rough sleeping, who don't want any support from us as a local authority in terms of move on, and who also are sporadically engaging with our outreach team. So in view of that data that come in at the end of September, what we're now looking to do is try and sensitively target those individuals and arrange to meet with those individuals to better understand why. What are the barriers that they don't want to engage with us? Is it because they're aware of the types of accommodation that we can offer and that isn't the type of accommodation that they're looking for? Is it that actually they don't want accommodation within the Caerphilly County Borough? And if so, what are the reasons for that? What we also find is that, yes, we do have individuals whose needs are so significant that they cannot manage in the current interim accommodation environment that we provide. And that's where for future kind of consideration needs to come around us looking at how we provide them with that safe accommodation of where, as you've highlighted, they may need to use substances, whether that be drugs or alcohol, but that can be done in a safe and controlled way where it doesn't impact negatively on the community of where they live, and that actually when they're ready to engage with the higher level of support to tackle some of that support need, that we've got the agencies there ready as a wraparound to provide them with that. I think we need to start moving to providing a form of accommodation for all and understanding what it is that they want. For some individuals who've rough slept, they just want a very simple 4 walls, no responsibilities, somewhere to get their head down of an evening, but where they can go about during the day and where they can safely perhaps use their alcohol or drugs. And that's kind of what we need to start considering and better understanding going forward.
Can I just follow up on that, just to find out roughly what sort of percentage increase have we seen in rough sleeping in recent times?
In terms of Caerphilly, our data has been quite static in terms of the numbers. So we've been routinely reporting kind of 6 to 9. However, we have seen an increase this month where it's jumped to just over kind of 15 individuals. And what I would say for Caerphilly is we report quite honestly about our rough sleeping figures. We've had numerous discussions with our Welsh Government team and with our relationship managers about the fact that we want to be open about this, which is why we've started breaking down our data. When we send our reports back to Welsh Government, we are now clearly stipulating how many are actually refusing to engage with us, but will engage with our outreach teams, how many have, through whatever reasons, have we had to ask to vacate that accommodation. And if we've asked them to vacate, what we're providing is the data on how many placements we've given them and what support has been on offer to them before we've made that decision. We're also starting to report on the individuals who may be rough sleeping in our borough from other local authority areas. Whilst we're not allowed to name those local authority areas, that intelligence is coming through. And wherever possible and where they're willing to engage, what we will always do is look at trying to repatriate them back to that local authority, whether that be trying to provide financial assistance through bus or train tickets so they can safely return and making arrangements for them to present to that authority.
Thanks very much, Kerry.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Kevin, I know you're next. If you just bear with me a second, just a supplementary question to that, Kerry. I know from previous conversations, you've referenced the fact that people are coming in from, sort of migrating in from other authorities. I wonder if you could just go through a little bit more about the kind of issues and reasons why, because there were some safety issues I think you touched on, which I think would be useful for members to know.
Certainly. What we are finding is that, particularly through the COVID pandemic, where all authorities have moved to the everybody in, what we're starting to see and what we're discussing as local authorities, there's quite a lot of transience amongst certain areas now where individuals who are rough sleeping may have burnt their bridges, so to speak, in other local authority areas, whether that be exhausted all the options available from that local authority or whether they have got associated with individuals who then may now pose a risk to them, i.e., prime example could be got involved with somebody who may owe a drug debt, and in order to remove themselves from that situation, they transit across to another local authority. What we're trying to do with those individuals is understand what those risks are. But as always, when there is a risk element to consider through homelessness, all local authorities are required to consider what the police support is in respect of that risk. And what we appreciate in some of these instances is that some individuals won't engage with police. There is that age-old fear of it's the police, we're not going to engage, we don't want to be perceived as kind of, getting anybody else into trouble, or there's the ultimate fear of if I report somebody, they're going to know it's me and then my safety. So we're trying to understand some of these challenges, but what we also find is quite the biggest challenge is that more often than not, individuals are also just exhausting through their own behaviour options, and they're presenting at other local authorities to see what assistance is on offer there.
Thanks for that, Kerry. Thank you very much. Kevin, over to you, sir.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Kerry. I'd like to ask about the analysis of individual needs. I refer you to a number of months ago, I was talking to 2 homeless people outside Asda. And I said, do you want me to get in touch with the homeless unit? And they said, no, we'd rather stay outside. And I started chatting to them, and they said, we don't want accommodation. And the words were, because the demons will come and get us. They also had mental health issues. Now, looking at my previous employment, which was in another authority, we had a gentleman sleeping in a graveyard. We had another 2 or 3 who had tents, and they would rather sleep on the beacons because they couldn't handle bed and breakfast accommodation, and that was their choice. And the question is really, Kerry, the health service is under so much pressure. Are we going to? I know we can try and engage with these people, which we are doing, but the bottom line is, if they'd rather be outside, you know, we cannot force them. And are we working with drug aid and mind to actually, you know, try our best? I'm sure we are, but there are going to be some individuals who I've come across who will just refuse. Yeah. Not because, you know, and if you mention the police or bureaucracy or the council, they just go to pieces. And they've obviously got mental health problems. And, you know, I remember people having tents, and then people would say, oh, the local authorities don't want to house these people, which is totally wrong. It's the individual needs and the analysis we need to actually get it. I'm sure we're doing it, but there will be some which will refuse to engage. Thank you, John.
Councillor Etheridge, I fully agree, and I myself have had experience with intrinsically entrenched rough sleepers where we've even offered permanent accommodation and they've still chose to rough sleep. And there will be a minority of which, no matter what we consider going forward, you know, is above and beyond what from a homelessness perspective we're able to deliver. But in terms of that needs analysis, it's something that myself and our supporting people manager are currently working on. We're doing a full service review of both the need for everyone who's on floating support, but also who is on our homelessness services in terms of that support. And that is going to formulate, and that needs analysis is going to formulate, part of a large part of us and our rapid rehousing plan going forward for the next 5 years. With regards to the multi-agency approach, yes, what we have and what we've been lucky enough with our supporting people to commission is both a specialist substance misuse worker and mental health worker who goes around our accommodation unit and also provides additional support to our rough sleeping team to be able to go and target individuals that isn't about their accommodation, but is about their need, their support need, their vulnerability. You know, we're not here to force somebody into accommodation. What I'm here to do as a holistic approach is say, when you're ready, we're here, but right now you've got access to this support, whether that be drug, alcohol or mental health, whether that be domestic abuse services, whatever that individual needs, at whatever level that they need. And when you're ready, we'll look at your rehousing. If we take the housing first model, which is something that we've started to work through in Caerphilly and where we will be developing moving forward, housing first is about providing somebody with accommodation, and when they're ready, working to address their support needs. As a starting point for some individuals, that may be the route that they're going down, and that's what we've started to look at. And the ethos around rapid rehousing is about that. It's about moving people as quickly as we can into permanent accommodation, and then when they're ready, looking at the support. The flip of that could be that some individuals with whatever type of accommodation that we could provide don't want that. So then our duties kick in to just make sure that we're providing the support. It is that age-old though, the type of accommodation we provide, because I myself have had experience of individuals who only want the bed and breakfast environment because they are not equipped to deal with the responsibilities of a tenancy or even the responsibilities and the requirements of being in supported accommodation. And actually, when you think about future models, our needs analysis will tell us, do we have that client group within Caerphilly County Borough Council? And if so, when we look at that 5-year strategy, how are we going to meet that need? How significant is that need? What units and how would we provide that in a safe environment? And that is what we're going to be tasking ourselves with over the next 6 months, ready to put forward our rapid rehousing plan.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kerry. Carl, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Kerry. You probably know where I'm going to come with this. Right. in regards to your review into emergency accommodation and providers, I personally feel that it's needed from personal experience in my ward. But I do feel, though, throughout the pandemic, the authority has been exposed in regards to our lack of facilities we've got as an authority, and we've just been in the hands really of the private sector. And in some cases, thank God for the private sector, but in other cases, it hasn't worked out that positively. So I just wanted to know, in terms of your future strategy for the review of emergency accommodation, so what is your key themes or aspirations then for future accommodation? Would it be things like more in-house provision, so we've got more control over these facilities rather than going through the private sector where we haven't got control over, those types of things. I know like authorities like Cardiff are looking at introducing pods, which they've brought in. So I just wanted to know what type of things you'll be looking at. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Kess. And I thought that you would be asking me something along those lines. In terms of our future development, I think that, you are right. But first of all, what I do want to say is, for Caerphilly and for a number of authorities, because I joined Caerphilly from another authority of where we were heavily reliant on bed and breakfast accommodation. And if it weren't for our private sector providers, we would not have been able to deliver and meet the needs and safely accommodate the numbers of individuals that across Wales everybody has. And we're not alone in Caerphilly. Most local authorities moved very quickly to bed and breakfast accommodation at levels that were unprecedented in terms of homelessness. Moving forward, I think what is clear, and I'm going to try not to use the word control, because we are about being person-centred and empowering individuals, but I think that what we need is to have more structure and more safe environments in our emergency accommodation, and being able to support them effectively, and being able to have more management and engagement with the staff who are in those accommodation units. So part of that is consideration of how do we bring some of this in-house, but it sits larger than that. The starting point of this links to our needs analysis, because there is no point us going off on a tangent and saying we need X amount of units for single person accommodation if out of those single person accommodation 50% have significant offending or significant substance misuse. Because what we recognise in those environments are the larger scale accommodation units are not conducive to those individuals. So the needs analysis, along with the review in terms of how we want to move forward, will allow us to consider where in the borough are we best placed to consider accommodation units, who and how are we able to deliver those. For example, if we wanted to bring some in-house in terms of us build or develop or modify current accommodation units, that may be an option, but also working with our partners. Our TFES in family accommodation unit in Caerphilly is done in conjunction with United Welsh. They've provided us with the accommodation unit. We've staffed and managed that unit for families. So it is about having those partnership discussions with our registered social landlord partners with regards to use of premises that may already exist and that may lend themselves to us taking forward in terms of those temporary accommodation units. But it goes wider than that. What we've got to understand to get this right is, do we need to be considering some units that allow people to safely use substances? And if so, where are they best placed to be? What wraparound services do we need around those? In terms of our data, and particularly that's changed over the last 18 months with COVID. But do we need some male and female only units? Young persons provision is very, very key. How are we going to meet immediate crisis-led accommodation needs for young people, particularly as we see the fallout of COVID and the financial impact of COVID, where potentially we could see more and more young people coming through the homelessness service, which some local authorities are reporting. How do we safely ensure that they've got access to accommodation, and how can we limit that accommodation? So ultimately, that is the move that we would like to go. We've got some excellent providers in the private sector within the borough. So it isn't to say that we wouldn't sustain those relationships, but I think that certainly from a local authority perspective, what we recognise is our model needs to change. And you've referenced Cardiff today, Councillor Kess, and I think that what Cardiff have led on for Wales is their assessment centre hub, which has the accommodation attached to it. And that is the model that is the pioneer across a number of authorities in Europe of where they've delivered rapid rehousing. In Cardiff, we're lucky enough pre-COVID to go and visit some in Norway. And Housing First and rapid rehousing starts within that region. So we've had numerous discussions with Cardiff. We've done a number of conferences with a number of other authorities. We've used the experience that they've had. And that isn't to say that a longer term objective for Caerphilly could be to have something similar. So you have a multi-agency hub available at the front of an accommodation unit, and then you've got a term stay to be able to fully assess somebody's need. You know, my staff have very limited time to assess somebody's need, and the support worker engagement can be over a sporadic time. You know, so we're waiting to see kind of the 6-month return from Cardiff in terms of the benefits of what the assessment centre hub has done, and certainly that's something that, you know, we've got our eye on as a Caerphilly County Borough Council, and whether or not in future that's something, that's a model that we may want to move forward with.
Okay, Carl, with that, yeah. Yeah, thanks. Thank you, thank you, Kerry. Councillor Williams, Walter Williams, you're next on our list.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Kerry. My question is, before lockdown, in this line, we had quite a few night shelters working. Are they opened up again for these people who just want to have a shower and a breakfast? And do we support them in any way? Oh, what way do we support them?
In terms of the night shelter provision, unfortunately, Welsh Government have made it clear that they are not supporting night shelter provision. The reason behind that is that their instruction to local authorities is clear in that everybody should be accommodated if they're homeless, and therefore a night shelter is not required. We did go back to query this because we recognise that there will be some individuals who may not want to access accommodation, and all authorities have gone back to Welsh Government on this. And recent update is that night shelters may be able to provide other sources, but not accommodation. So we will be going to speak to our previous providers for our night shelters within the borough, and I've had some contact back from some of them already to look at what it is that they may wish to provide. So for things like breakfast clubs, etc., or accessing shower facilities, that may be available, but of course what we'd need to ensure is that that is COVID safe.
Thank you, Kerry. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Kerry. Liz, Councillor Allsworth, your question, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I was wondering about the proportion of female to male homeless people that we have on our books at the moment. And also, how do you deal with a homeless person who's got a pet? And, you know, they've got the dog and that's their biggest pleasure then. So how do we manage that kind of situation, please?
In terms of the proportionality, we're currently on an 80-20% split, although female presentations are starting to slowly increase. In terms of the situation with pets, that's a very worthwhile conversation, and I should have mentioned that in terms of our rough sleeping. People and individuals having pets is a significant barrier to people accessing temporary accommodation. And whilst, you know, we are able to access and speak to charity agencies, you know, like Dogs Trust, etc., to see what accommodation, you know, can be provided on a temporary basis, it goes beyond that. For some individuals, when they become homeless, the only person that they have, that they recognise in terms of a support is, for example, and it's predominantly usually a dog, is their dog, and they do not want to be separated for their dog. So one of the things that we need to consider moving forward is, how do we provide temporary accommodation that allows them to bring their pet? You know, we've offered to pay for placements in kennels, etc., to allow people to access temporary accommodation, but they don't want to be split from the dog. What we haven't got are providers at the moment who can accommodate dogs. So that is a massive challenge across all authorities, and it's something that we recognise, and it's something that future proofing we need to be taken into account.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Councillor Mann, Colin, your question, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Kerry, for your presentation and your very comprehensive answers. Just for a moment on the last one, probably a lot of people had more loyalty from a dog than any other experiences that they've had, and you can understand people wanting not to be separated from that. It's I was looking at you mentioned repeat presentations, and you were refocusing on the prevention side, and mentioned workshops and so on in the appendix. How do you see that changing? I mean, it's maybe early in the process to forecast what's going to happen. Do you see any sort of shortcomings that need sort of exploring and solving?
What I have had an opportunity to do since joining Caerphilly is we've commissioned Crisis, the charity Crisis, to undertake a bit of a service review for us and understand, and they're currently in a project phase with us at looking at what we class our falling out rate, our repeat presentation rate. And it is that project that comes to a conclusion in December. So when we summarise all the findings from that and we look at the outcomes in terms of the client engagement and the reasons why, that is where we'll be taking forward some solutions starting in January. So we've got a feedback session in December following us commissioning them to do that on our behalf. And it is that information and data that we'll be taking forward to implement some very quick changes. But I think already what we have found is that some of our current existing ways of working can be barriers to individuals. And it's so in terms of our communication, then the actual access to our service, how are we going to make that more user friendly? So it's where we've looked at internal systems in terms of, making sure that we've got phone systems that allow us to have multiple contacts coming in at any one time. So people aren't left ringing and ringing and ringing back. We appreciate that some individuals don't have an unlimited level of credit on their phone. It's us moving towards, modern technology, dare I say it, like using WhatsApp. We weren't particularly good at corresponding on email, but email where you're in Wi-Fi spots is free to use for a lot of people. So it's quick fixes that we've implemented already in terms of that initial assessment phase. I think the challenge comes for us, which is in the development phase around getting people moved on into that accommodation. I won't kind of mislead here. We've got a bottleneck in temporary accommodation at the moment, and day by day we're often at breaking point in terms of capacity, and it's only where we're able to move individuals on that is allowing us to continue to accommodate. And we have saturated the market with private sector landlords who are willing to work with us at the moment. They are the challenges now that we're really kind of looking at how we're going to overcome these. Unfortunately, they come with time, which is why we've refocused on prevention and making sure that our assessment processes and the options that we're looking at for people who are in accommodation are not adding to the ones where we can't prevent. So it is looking at individuals where they may be in an affordable accommodation at the moment and us paying rent top-ups, us paying rent arrears to sustain that accommodation with a view of moving them on in a planned way, rather than them ending up being evicted and then having to come through the emergency accommodation route. It is looking at, and one of the things that we're in discussion with now is looking at particularly the landlord-tenant relationship. We can deal with arrears, we've got budgets where we can pay arrears, but what the staff aren't trained to do is landlord-tenant mediation. That's a gap. So what we're looking at now is, do we train the staff, but if the staff got the ability to deliver that service, or is that something that we need to consider funding in terms of that specialist post? Because if you get the two, we're keeping people in their accommodation. We have family mediation already, but that family mediation is age limited to 24. We need to consider our mediation services providing a slightly older age range of family mediation. Looking at things like, where potentially applicable, we all know that relationship breakdown is a large trigger in terms of people coming through homelessness. But the proportion of those, if they had access to potentially kind of relationship counselling, may be a solution. It's thinking slightly sometimes outside the box of, if we paid X, Y, or Z as a preventative measure, would that prevent that couple from breaking down, and could they sustain that accommodation together? So it is thinking about all of these strands in terms of that early prevention. But it also goes back to building some of the partner relationships now with schools, with local GP surgeries, to have those discussions in terms of, if you become aware and you've got that relationship with that individual, these are some of the questions that you need to be asking them. These are the routes that we can direct them. It may not be to us, it may be around benefit advice, etc. But it's making agencies aware of where they can go and what they can do to start that early intervention.
Okay, thanks, Kerry. Could I come back for a moment, Chair?
Yeah, of course, Colin.
Kerry mentioned the bottleneck, and it was disappointing to hear in the response to the previous question about the homeless shelters that it appears that Welsh Government officials don't sort of appreciate the good work that could be done with that sort of thing. Just one, on page 26, Kerry, it mentions phase 2 fund. I think it should be funding. But anyway, that's only a small point. But it's, again, I was interested in the landlord incentives, and it's probably, you're talking about incentives, I imagine, because of the issue that you just mentioned about actually getting accommodation. Is it just financial incentives, or is there anything else we can offer to?
I think that depends on which way we're looking at it. So in terms of people in accommodation, it is around, like I've just said, landlord-tenant mediation, and it is about financial incentive. You know, we have a large proportion of individuals who predominantly come through with rent arrears. And actually, while that may not be affordable for a short period of time, particularly with furlough, particularly with the current kind of financial situation, you know, we take currently, we're going to have massive gas prices. People on universal credit have just had their universal credit reduced. And it is about allowing people time to breathe and rebudget and realign their finances. So there are options to pay kind of, you know, rent top-ups, etc. for periods of time. But I think what we've got to start looking at is further afield. You know, particularly through COVID, relationships could have broke down quite significantly between landlord and tenant. That interaction may not have been there. People may have withdrawn themselves. We're aware that mental health has increased, which naturally means that people don't want to engage and can sometimes not have the confidence to raise issues. So we're looking at that aspect, but then some of the incentive considerations come from how do we take forward our Caerphilly Key service? We have been lucky enough that we've had the number of landlords come forward and provide us with those properties. But what we are facing in the private sector, unfortunately, is a stark reality that we are seeing more landlords exiting the sector than we've ever seen before. But yet we need that accommodation more than when we've ever needed it. So for us, it's looking at, and we're about to start this scoping exercise through both our Caerphilly Keys landlords and our landlord forum at the end of this month. What do you think you would need from a local authority to work with us with an affordable property and to work with our tenants, irrespective for some individuals around their support needs? We have a number of landlords who will happily work with people who are working, etc. But they often are the ones who can go to estate agents and they'll meet the criteria for estate agents and they don't need to use our Caerphilly Keys properties. So that's the intelligence that we're gathering now as we start to bring back online all of our forums now that we're coming out of the kind of the COVID lockdown. And that is what we're going to need to consider moving forward.
Thanks again, Kerry. You seem to be an encyclopedia on this stuff. Sorry.
I wouldn't say that, Councillor Mann.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes. Thank you, Colin. Yes, and I think yes, encyclopedic is exactly the phrase. Councillor Cushing, Donna Cushing, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. My question really is a crossover between Councillor Aldworth and obviously Councillor Cuss, because it's quite strange when he actually mentioned about the pods in Cardiff. That was exactly what went through my mind. Why don't we have some of these pods in Caerphilly? And it comes under the Caerphilly umbrella, because therefore then we can make sure that they are actually COVID compliant. If they come under the Caerphilly CCBC umbrella. And also it would allow people with dogs then be able to access accommodation with a pet. Because I could only imagine what it's like for a homeless person when they lean in on that particular animal for support and they aren't allowed to take it into any sort of accommodation. I spoke to a number of people homeless people in Cardiff, and obviously some access the Haggard and some don't. And a lot of the reasoning behind that not accessing the Haggard, not to do with any drugs or drink, because they're not allowed to take anything like that in with them, is that they sometimes feel it's a bit like a powder keg about to explode and they don't feel safe. So pods would give them, individual pods would give them that sort of safety where they wouldn't have to worry about anybody else.
And We are in the process of looking at pods. What I would say with pods, there are a number of different style pods, and some authorities who've brought the pod model on have actually had more safety issues and health and wellbeing issues than what they initially thought. There are a lot of security issues with some of the pod model. I think what we're considering are kind of more modern methods of construction in terms of, you know, smaller units of accommodation that are kind of studio flat style, but are in kind of, you know, specific areas where you may have 4 or 5 of these types of units, of where then you can bring your pet. That's kind of where we are. We are in discussions quite closely with Cardiff, because as I said, in terms of their assessment centre, they've taken the lead for Wales, as you probably would expect as the city, and where they do have a significant a significant challenge around rough sleeping. So myself and the Cardiff team are in regular discussion around kind of the models that they're bringing on, kind of what they looked at prior to that, because I'm a big believer in not reinventing the wheel. And if somebody's done some of that kind of consultation process, and I appreciate some of the landscape may be slightly different, but it's worth speaking and using that intelligence. But I do think that sometimes the pod model is not a long-term solution. And what we need to be looking at is that long-term solution. And, you know, from a financial point of view, which we have to consider, they can be quite costly. And it's whether or not that money on occasion, when we look at our numbers in comparison to Cardiff, is better directed in terms of providing more longer term sustainable accommodation.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Steve, you've got your hand up again, and I know you want to come in with some more questions. Would you like to join us now?
Yep, thanks for that. Just a bit of information to feedback to the meeting. I think we've undersold this issue a little bit. We talked earlier, I think it was Councillor Sorales asked about how many people were homeless, and we talked about a number of 15. But if you look at the stats for 2019-20 for Caerphilly, there was 576 households, not individuals, households, which were in threat of being homeless. And out of those 576, Caerphilly managed to avoid 423 of them and put 123 people into temporary accommodation. So this isn't just about 15 people who may be on the streets tonight. This is a huge piece of work. And you know, this is why I'll say it again, I'm delighted to see that the emphasis move away from finding emergency accommodation back towards prevention. Just to mention or to support one thing, the pod issue causes more problems than it resolves, and I speak from personal experience there from my previous career. Two questions for myself to sort of end. One is, have we got an enhanced budget to look at a different strategy? Because we're seeing in other authorities that actually the budget is reduced for homelessness, not increased, even though the demand is increased disproportionately. So that's one question. And then my second one is quite specific. In the reliance on the public sector housing, if we're placing homeless people in those private accommodation, who is the responsible person? Because these are vulnerable people.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll go to question number 1 first. No, we do not have an enhanced budget. So we are expected currently to deliver whatever model we put forward with the budgets that are initially given year end from Welsh Government to local authorities, and then what is aligned to our homelessness service as a result of that. We've been lucky enough throughout the COVID pandemic that there has been additional funding from Welsh Government to meet that COVID-19 requirement. At this current time, that funding ends in March 2022, and there's no update at the moment as to whether or not, while we move and make our way forward into rapid rehousing, whether or not there's going to be any transition funding for local authorities to be able to meet that model. What is clear with rapid rehousing is when we are ready to make our move and when we implement that kind of in the summer of next year, it's a 3-year implementation to see the effects. Scotland have led on this in terms of the UK. We've been in a number of conferences with Scotland, and what is coming out loud and clear from Scotland's perspective is this is a 3-year model once you implement the model, and therefore all local authorities in Wales are routinely lobbying Welsh Government to say, we want to do this, we want to make the move to do our best to eradicate homelessness. That is why we're in the field that we're in, but we need financial support to deliver this at the pace that we need to deliver it. In terms of the public sector housing, Councillor Skivens, I am going to make the assumption, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that you're referring to the bed and breakfast kind of temporary accommodation style.
Yeah.
Okay. In terms of responsibility, just for you to be clear, we staff those. So we have support workers commissioned through our Supporting People service on site, and then we are able to provide security throughout the evenings in those units of where we then have those reports. In terms of the management of those individuals, again, their placements are decided by ourselves. So if there's behavioural issues, our staff in the emergency accommodation team, along with support, along with any other agencies that we feel appropriate. So for example, if it was somebody with an offending background, we would call a multi-agency meeting with that individual to discuss that offending or discuss that behaviour that may have caused an issue within that accommodation unit. And we're able to make the choice to move that person as and when is fit, or if the behaviour is such, unfortunately, which can sometimes be the case, significant enough to result in us having to end that placement, then we will look at due consideration as to whether or not we feel that is the right thing to do. But there is there's daily contact with all of our providers through our emergency accommodation team, and all of our support staff are on site, and then we have security throughout the evenings.
Thanks for that. Chair, if I can come just back in on one final point.
If it's the final one, yes, Steve, go on, yeah.
If I could come back in on just one final point. In our, if we're accepting this paper and, we're seeing a change in the strategy, which I think is really, really good, and we're going to engage with a number of organisations and multidisciplinary within the council, how do we support Kerry in that? Is there a lead councillor that she can respond to, or perhaps this is an area that we should be looking at? We have champions for other issues. Given the sort of multi-faceted issues here, I recommend that we should consider whether there's a senior councillor appointed as the lead.
Well, thank you, Steve. I don't know whether Kerry probably won't want to comment on that, I imagine, but we do have Councillor Lisa Phipps here. If Lisa's still here, she might want to just add something to that. She has an incredibly broad portfolio. It's described as housing, but goodness me, isn't it a lot more than that? Do you want to just come in on that, Lisa?
Can you hear me okay? My microphone is...
Yeah, it's a bit quiet, but yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So thanks for your comment, Steve. And I am the homelessness champion, so I don't know if that's enough of a title, or are you suggesting something else, Steve?
No, I just think that with the growth in this area, and certainly with the change in strategy, that the task will grow considerably. And I don't know your full portfolio, but it's whether you have the capacity to support the issue as it grows.
I'm confident, Steve, that I've got the appropriate officers to fully support me.
Excellent. Thank you.
And thanks very much indeed. Okay, I think we're drawing to a conclusion now. Walter, you've got a hand up. Is that a legacy hand, or did you have one final question, Councillor Williams?
It's a legacy hand.
Okay.
Sorry, Chair, but I thought it was marked down on my...
My system is all over the place tonight, so it's probably entirely my fault. Okay, if I can just sort of encapsulate, I think, things that I think all of us here, quite frankly, I'm delighted. I think that we've had you present this report initially. I think what it's done is it's given us all the opportunity to really understand the scope, breadth, complexity, and demands of the work that you will undertake. And I think we all want to take our hats off and applaud you for what you're doing so far. It's absolutely astonishing. But I think importantly, what I think it does show is how effectively you and we as a local authority are delivering on this. There are still issues to be addressed clearly, and I think the issue about Welsh Government and their kind of top level view of what we should be doing and perhaps reluctance to commit to funding at this stage is another issue which I know you're pursuing very much, but it's something else that I think we're all very conscious and aware of. But in short, I just want to say thank you so much for what you've said tonight. It's been hugely interesting, and I rather hope that in fact this is one of the videos that people do actually go and see, because what it does is presents a side to the authority that most people don't understand or grasp. You know, vital stuff which we all know, and I think it's important that people really do understand the work you're doing. So thanks ever so much indeed. And if I can move on now, I'm aware we've spent a lot of time on this, but the agenda now moves to agenda item 5. Which is the local housing strategy, just as important, if not more so. So it's over to Cabinet Member Lisa Phipps again to present the report. Lisa, to you.
Thank you, Chair. But I've noticed Councillor Colin Mann has his hand up. I don't know if that's
popped up again.
Sorry about that.
Thank you. It's come back on my screen. It wasn't there earlier. If you're happy that that if everyone's happy that Colin, have you got one final question? Because I had actually rounded this up.
No, my hand is down, Chair. Since the last
I'm glad to see that, Lisa, your system and my
thanks
system
anyway,
are
Lisa.
synchronized. Wrong, but synchronized.
Yes,
so,
synchronized.
Yeah.
If Steve can take his hand down as well, so we know where we start.
My hand is hand is down.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. In the summer of 2020, the Council appointed ARC4 Limited to assist it to produce a new local housing strategy. This evening, as members, you are being asked to provide your views on the new local housing strategy, which is entitled An Agenda for Change 2021-26. Caerphilly Council understands that good quality housing is a platform for change for our communities and neighbourhoods. This local housing strategy sets out our plans to build successful lives, create strong and resilient communities, invest in a local and vibrant economy, and promote healthy lives across the borough over the next 5 years. It provides a clear vision of how we can, through co-production with our residents and partners, achieve a shared aspiration in providing good quality housing and services in communities which are safe, sustainable and healthy. The vision not only focuses on the provision of new housing and the maintenance and improvement of existing homes, but also focuses on those services which support people to access housing and maintain independence to live in their homes for longer. The vision also focuses on the wider community, the environment, and maximising the community benefits that can be derived from the investment in housing that will take place over the period of the strategy. Chair, can I take this opportunity to thank Jane Roberts-Waite, who is on the call, who's the Strategic Coordination Manager, and Mark Jennings, the Principal Housing Strategy Officer, for all their efforts in bringing this strategy together. My thanks also to ARC4, who assisted us to produce this strategy. Thank you, Chair.
You may indeed, Councillor Phipps. Thank you very much for that introduction. It's over to you now, Jane, if you'd like to take us through the report.
There we go. Thank you, Councillor Ridgewell, and good evening, members. As Councillor Phipps has noted, we appointed ARC4 back in the summer now of 2020. It seems an age ago, but in fact it wasn't that long ago at all. And the purpose of that appointment was to assist us in developing what is essentially an ambitious local housing strategy, a strategy that's designed to push us and stretch us and really test our ambition, if you like. The last strategy expired in 2013, so this is very much a case of, you know, bringing us up to date and ensuring that we've got this high level vision. Throughout the entire project, you'll see documented in the report that consultation with officers, members, stakeholders, including local developers and housing associations, and our communities, including tenants and residents, has taken place. You will see in paragraph 5.3 the process that we've documented there, including a relevant review of all the literature and data sets that currently exist with regards to housing within not just Wales, but also within the UK, and also looking, of course, at our local housing market in some detail. A robust analysis of the evidence that's been made available to us, and also interviews with officers and members, which have culminated in a concept document which kind of outlined the proposed principles, sections and key messages that we should be looking at. And that was the document that we repeatedly consulted upon with partners and our communities. It was very much a document that evolved throughout the consultation process. 152 stakeholders were contacted and 27 provided a response. The concept document was updated in light of those responses. And unfortunately, I think due to COVID-19 regulations, of course, we were unable to take face-to-face interviews or one-to-one meetings with residents, because what we would have liked to have done is perhaps run a roadshow or focus groups to actually engage people in a conversation about housing. You know, housing is such a fundamental right. We've just heard from Kerry, who's talked about the fact that, you know, the number of homeless people and emergency accommodation, housing is so important to our everyday lives. And yet I think people who have a home take it for granted somewhat. So what we tried to do to engage people in the conversation and the dialogue, an A5 poster was delivered to every household in the county borough, and it pointed to a dedicated web page that we had designed and set up, together with advice on how to actually contact the council if you couldn't access the internet but you did still want to say. A local press campaign also took place, and also our comms team were very much using Facebook, etc., as the main social media platform, again, to try and engage discussion in housing, you know, the whole housing landscape in Caerphilly, not just how we manage homes and how developing new homes, but the context of housing, our housing offer, where housing sits, in what environment, etc. So the whole conversation about housing and homes and how important it is to our well-being and our lives. The document was also translated into an easy read version, and there was also a BSL video that was developed at our request. A prize draw was held, which resulted in 76 responses received, and all of those comments were taken into account by ARC4 when developing that concept document. And you'll see that paragraph 512 highlights the responses that we received from people. You'll see in 514 that, as Councillor Phipps has mentioned already, that the strategy, the highest response from people suggested that the strategy be called the Caerphilly County Borough Housing Strategy, an agenda for change. And I think that's very fitting, really, in terms of the way in which we want to take forward housing in Caerphilly, and the ambition that not only we, but also our partners and our stakeholders have that sits behind that. Whilst the overall response to our consultation could be questioned, I guess, because, like I say, in some ways it was disappointed that people didn't engage more and people didn't get involved in the conversation. There were some consistent messages that actually came through that ARC4 have taken into account. One of those was very much about any new development being supported by improvements in infrastructure. So not just, you know, the road infrastructure, but also access to GP surgeries, schools, etc. So that was a message that came through very clear. The focus on tackling and mitigating the effects of climate change was also a very clear message that we were given. And also the need to rebalance markets and ensure equity, ensure that people, regardless of their current situation, could access homes. Either, you know, intermediate housing, social rent housing, or also market sales, and that there was an equity, if you like, to enable people to do that. And finally, there was also a message coming through about creating more choices and ensuring affordability, which obviously is absolutely critical, particularly at this moment in time. The draft local housing strategy therefore attempts to take all of the messages that we received into account, and what we therefore have is a very ambitious strategy that not only focuses on new homes and existing homes, but also the wider services that sit around housing, very much around health and well-being, of supporting people to live in their homes for longer, increasing our offer for older people, for example, and and the wider community, and housing as a catalyst as well for employment, apprenticeships, and supporting the circular and foundational economy. You know, housing is very much a catalyst to support a number of other strands, if you like. There are 5 strategic priorities within the document that have been named, and I'm going to just quickly take you through each one. Number 1, creating better choices. This is very much about the person-centred approach that we've spoken and touched upon this evening. It's basically about providing tailored solutions to reduce inequality across the borough and to make homes available to all. Intermediate and low-cost home ownership options is something that the council hasn't done before, but with its new development programme now, it's very much part of our offer. Our offer for older people needs to change. We recognise that, and certainly our offer for later living is going to change, and we're focusing very much as a council certainly on the T Darren proposal as we speak. And very much about first-time buyers and offering young people in the county borough the opportunity to actually get a foot on that ladder in what is an incredibly difficult marketplace. Okay. Number 2, creating great places to live. And this is very much linked to the council's place shaping framework, very much working with our colleagues in regeneration and the housing associations, and maintaining and improving our existing homes, creating new, but creating those cohesive communities, ensuring that we're not just building on the periphery of communities, but integrating any developments we might have, ensuring neutral tenure, for example, blended communities, and that mix, if you like. Number 3 is very much about creating healthy homes and vibrant communities. This touches upon some of the things that Kerry's already mentioned, working with private sector landlords, for example, our empty homes team and repurposing town centres, our Caerphilly Quays opportunities, which again Kerry's mentioned this evening, and also with Caerphilly Cares to ensure that that support and wraparound care is there wherever we build. In terms of number 4, we're talking about delivering new homes, which is obviously very much at the top of the council's agenda, but also our work with the housing associations and the Affordable Homes Partnership. We want in this strategy to tell developers that we are open for business. We're very strong in trying to send that message through this strategy, and also putting together some innovative solutions and new models of funding. You know, this is a completely new arena for us, and also the way in which we work with our HAs in order to, as I say, develop new homes. And number 5, supporting specialist housing needs. We've heard a lot tonight about the need for 1-bedroom accommodation, both general needs, but also to support homelessness and the rapid rehousing legislation that we know is coming down the line. And that has to be very much at the forefront of our minds. Some of the conversations, I think, if we are to be honest, may be unpalatable, but I think those are very difficult conversations that we're going to have, and this strategy sets the tone, if you like, for having those conversations and talking about the development of positive pathways for people with very complex needs often. Okay, there are 3 strategic priorities as well, or strategic themes that sit throughout the document. Those are also noted in the report, you'll see, and they will come as no surprise to you. And so in terms of the implementation of the strategy and how we will bring this strategy to life, because very often, you know, we talk about strategies all the time, don't we? What we don't want, of course, is this to be a strategy that sits on the shelf. And what we're proposing is that ARC4 are currently helping us with a delivery plan, which will set out and breathe life into the actions contained within this strategy. Sorry, there's a fly in my way. So the delivery plan will very much, like I say, breathe life into the strategy, and hopefully will enable us to identify champions across our own organisation, but also in other organisations that we need to work more closely with in order to deliver some of these ambitions. That delivery plan will be underpinned by an investment plan, because I believe that, you know, a delivery plan is fine to say how we're going to deliver some of these actions, but what we really need to do is say how we're going to resource some of this activity. You know, what funding is out there. We really need to focus on maximising the external funding we have in order to ensure that we are able to deliver some of the real big ticket items in this strategy. Okay, the strategy itself and the delivery plan and the investment plan will be overseen by something called the Affordable Homes Partnership. The people who sit on that partnership have all signed a memorandum of understanding, and essentially that partnership comprises the chief executives of our housing association partners, and obviously the acting chief executive, Dave Street, chairs that particular forum. So they will monitor progress, and then regular reports will be brought back to the relevant scrutiny committee. Members are therefore asked to note this report and its contents, and I'll take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Jane. Your last line is pertinent because what I omitted to do with the previous report was to refer to the fact that members are required to make note of that report. It wasn't one that we voted on, and it may well be the case with this one, but that depends on how the debate actually ensues. And what I just wanted to say was that I kind of made a slightly flippant remark, I think, about the importance of housing. But while you were talking, my mind went back to, oh my goodness me, a long time ago. When I was doing my DMS, it was Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Some of you might remember that one, yeah? And I'm fairly sure top of the list there was housing. So I think as a fundamental, it is the cornerstone, the building block for all of our lives, for our lives to be stable and secure and for us to grow and develop. Housing is the critical factor. So you can't overemphasize how important that is. I've said my little spiel. I'll open it up for questions. I believe the first person who was going to speak is Councillor Cushing, Donna Cushing.
Thanks, Chair. I think you're going to shoot me now in a minute because I've got actually a number of questions on this particular report. Bearing in mind what Jane has actually said about the amount of responses received. Sorry, I'm going back to the report now because I've got them all highlighted. Regarding ARC 4, obviously, was there a cost implication to use these services? Was the strategy and the report done in conjunction with officers within the council, or was it based on their actual input, or did they actually do the consultation themselves? Do you want me to go on with the other questions, or would you like to answer that one first? Most of them are just one-off answers, Jane, I can assure you.
I think it might be best to give you a list of questions, and then if you're okay to write them down, Jane, you can answer them all in at the end, yes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, Donna, yes, fire away.
Okay, then 5.3E, extensive consultation on the concept document with a wide range of stakeholders, such as, that was my question on that one. G, facilitating a series of virtual public consultation events. Basically, how do you hope to achieve this, or have you actually done some virtual consultation? Then I'm going on to 5.8 regarding British Sign Language. Is that on the CCB website? I told him most of them will only be one answer questions. The overall number is very poor considering the population in Caerphilly, which is 5.10. You only actually had 67 residents. I take on board what you said, and that there was a A5 leaflet that was sent out earlier on within the consultation. However, did they think of actually sending out a copy of questions and for them to return back in a free envelope? Because I know a lot of people obviously don't have technology and electronics. I know my dad is absolutely useless and things like that. But did you actually also email the councillors to ask them to put it on their Facebook pages so they could notify their own residents within the CCBC area? Right, going down the report now. I think it was about 8 questions I had altogether.
How many more, Donna? How many more have you got?
I've only got 3 more.
Okay,
right.
Go on.
On the actual page 42, we are focusing on a person-centred solution. Is this based on the percentages received from the 76 people in the report? Because otherwise, I just think the numbers are quite low on that one. And there's 2 on one page. I highlighted them, so if you bear with me a second, I'm just going down. Right, okay. I'm glad to see that GPs may be used within the consultation regarding these, because in all other planning things, it's never been considered before. but we also have to consider the health aspects regarding dentists. And is the meeting zero carbon targets based on the UK government guidelines? There we are, done them now. Thank you.
I think you're stretching it a bit there, Donna, but I appreciate that.
They're mostly only one word answers.
I think probably actually you'll have more than one word answers, because I know some of the answers myself and they're quite complex issues. But there we are. Jane, if you can answer the key ones to that, if in fact there's more information that we need, I'm sure that Donna will be happy for you to get back to her personally on some of the other lesser points. But if you can give it your best shot, please.
I'm going to give it a go. Okay.
Fine.
Was there a cost implication? No. There was a full procurement undertaken and a full analysis of the tenders submitted. So there was no, we did have a budget in mind, but there was no cost implication. In terms of the officers involved, officers from across the council have been involved in every team that you can imagine, and not just on a one-time only basis. They've been repeatedly consulted as part of this document, as have some members as well. In terms of 5.3, you mentioned stakeholders. Those stakeholders include our housing association partners, local developers, private sector partners, landlords, the whole range of housing providers, for example, and those people responsible for managing housing in Caerphilly, together, of course, with our communities, and I'll touch on that in a moment. In terms of the virtual consultation events, the virtual consultation events were advertised. They were promoted via our website. They were promoted via Facebook, and people were invited to get in touch with us if they did want to participate or if they couldn't participate. Again, the response was very, very poor. So those were actually cancelled. In terms of number 5, which you referred to 5.8, and you asked about the CCBC website. Just clarify for me again.
British Sign Language video.
British Sign Language was on our website. Absolutely, it was, and is available should you wish to view it. Number 6, the overall number was incredibly poor, and I would agree with you, quite frankly. I do feel that so many more people should have been involved in this conversation. But what I will say is that we tried absolutely everything, considering the circumstances we were in, given the COVID restrictions. We tried as much as we could. We tried things we've never done before, and possibly won't do again either, because, you know, we really pushed the boundaries and tested things out. People were offered the opportunity to get in contact with us, and they would have had a stamped address envelope then to respond. We also went out, as I say, via Facebook and Facebook polls, asking questions of people. But I think, as I've said, if you have a home, people tend to take it for granted, unfortunately. And I think moving forward, particularly from a co-production perspective and around the delivery plan, what we are going to have to do is try and very, very hard and engage people in this conversation. It is so important. As Councillor Ridgewell said at the beginning, you know, you look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and a home is the fundamental starting point, or a safe and secure home is a fundamental starting point. In terms of number 7, person-centred solutions, that doesn't really relate back to that number. Person-centred solutions is about us and our partners providing services that people need in the way that they want to receive them, rather than assuming we know what services people want and we know how they want to receive them. It's very much about providing that bespoke level of support for people. And Kerry's actually touched upon some of that in her presentation. In terms of number 8 and the zero carbon targets, those targets are the targets set by Welsh Government. We're very much on that agenda, as you'll be aware, in terms of our development programme. It's the absolute priority, or certainly one of a number of priorities for us in relation to that, mitigating the effects of climate change, providing energy efficient homes, lowering energy costs for our tenants, and basically building for the future.
Fantastic, that is, actually. I agree with that 100%. Thank you, Jane.
Thank you very much, Jane. A very comprehensive answer. Councillor Cass, Carl, you're next on my list.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Jane. So in regards to page number 66, the need for a gypsy traveller site. Obviously, the last assessment that was taken by the authorities, part of the LDB process, identified that we did not need a site. I'm just wondering, I know this might be early days because the process hasn't been completed yet, but do you think, based on the information to date, that this council would probably need to look at a site in the near future? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kirsten. Nice to see you again. You're absolutely right in that the process hasn't been completed yet, and officers have been out engaging with Gypsy, Roma and Traveller residents of the county borough in order to inform the Gypsy Traveller accommodation assessment, which we're currently undertaking at the moment. That piece of work has not yet been completed. It will be fed into the LDP, as you rightly point out, and I think it would be premature of me to actually, give a view on that at this precise moment in time, quite frankly.
That's fine, Jane. But obviously, the last sentence, which says the replacement LDP will continue to include a criteria-based policy, which is fine, and I totally get that. But unfortunately, the criteria-based policy that we have in place, which I found from personal experience, doesn't offer fairness. Because if you've got an application which is put in, which is outside the settlement area, this criteria can still be applied. Now, if I wanted to build a house on that area, I'm simply not allowed, in terms of planning, in terms of the LDP policies, I won't be allowed to build a house on that land. So that criteria-based policy really needs addressing. You may not want to comment on this, but I really think that we need to be equal in our approach when we are dealing with this type of thing. Thank you.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I can't comment, can I, on planning policy. I think that is something, though, that both you and I will be feeding back to our planning colleagues, although, as you know, their hands are very much tied, Carl, in this respect. So, but your point is noted and I will feed it back.
And I'd second that. I think there are always issues in connection with planning which kind of confuse us all and often seem to constrain us. And there's a whole raft of issues there that I think we'd like to take forward, but that's for another meeting and another time. Next on my list is Councillor Walter Williams. Walter, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. Hello, Jane. Page 46 concerns me. At the start, you said the Welsh Government projections tell us that we need to increase the supply of affordable homes, in particular, smaller one-bedroom and larger four-bedroom, and that we have too many three-bedroom properties. Well, in my ward, I find the three-bedroom, we are desperate to have these, because the houses I grew up in were three-bedroom NCB house. Now Charter and different people have taken them over. They turn them into two-bedroom. And after a family has moved in and they increase in size, now they're desperate to move out. And this is helping to destroy the community that I live in, really. Because I have one family who has a 14-year-old boy. He's been bullied and ridiculed in school because he has to use the same bedroom as his 7-year-old sister. So he spends a lot of time in his grandparents' property, which is destroying the family. And when we've had families move out of the community into different villages, it's also destroying my community, in a way. So another little bit of history of mine, when I started working in '63, the council were building a lot of council houses. I started work on the Britannia estate. And then we went to Wynebofa, Top of the Barn, Edward Street, and other boroughs as well. And I bet 90% of them people are still in those houses because they have no need to move. They had 3-bedroom and they were happy as the family got bigger, they stayed. But I'm finding we are desperate. So how do we come to the fact that we don't need these homes anymore?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Williams, for your question. I mean, it is an interesting one, and at the moment we're in the process of undertaking another or an updated local housing market assessment, which at the end of this year should give us a better indication of the need within the county borough. This is a strategic document. It doesn't drill down into different wards, but we do have an overwhelming requirement for one person or one bedroom accommodation within the county borough, and that requirement is not being met. It is a source of contention because very often when we're working with developers, they don't want to build that type of accommodation because it requires more management. It's a conversation that Kerry in particular and I are having with our providers. And it's also something that we as a council are taking into consideration when we're looking at our own development programme. We do need to build according to need, and the need at the moment is very much that one bedroom accommodation requirement. What we are looking to try and do though, and I will caveat what I've just said, is to build blended communities. So what we don't want is a repeat of the past. We don't necessarily want all our one bedroom accommodation in one place. So we do want to create blended communities which are mixed tenure and which have a range of accommodation. As I've just said, one of the things within this strategy is very much about increasing choice, but we also have to be mindful of affordability and also the implications of benefits or the absence of benefits and the implication of that on people who perhaps are under occupying. Okay, and perhaps, you know, I don't know the particular circumstances of the person that you referenced, and I won't assume to do that. But, you know, unfortunately, I think where those issues exist, there is support within the council in order to provide advice to those families, perhaps on what their options might be. And if you'd want to get in contact with me after this meeting or perhaps later on in the week, by all means, you know, we can perhaps provide that support and I can put that family, subject to their permission, in touch with that support. In terms of our development programme, like I said, the need is very much about one person accommodation. That one person accommodation that we're looking to provide as part of our development programme will try and contain now flexible space, so that that space can accommodate either an expansion, if you like, so that one single person perhaps, you know, move into a couple situation. It will try to accommodate people who work from home. It will try to accommodate people, for example, who need a carer to stay overnight. And if we were to include another bedroom in that offer, very often people would then find that their benefit would be impacted as a consequence. So it's a very difficult balance. In the north, as a council, we have 3-bedroom accommodation voids. We have quite a few 3-bedroom properties that are currently void that we can't let because there is no demand for them. And we are going to have to look at, as you've already pointed out, perhaps converting those properties into maybe 1 or 2 beds. Does that give some context? I appreciate it doesn't drill down into the detail of your particular ward, but I hope it gives some context to the strategy.
Walter, did you want to come back on that? I might have lost you. I'm sure if Councillor Williams wants to come back in, and he will do, Jane. So we'll move on.
Sorry, I muted. Yeah, sorry,
okay, right.
Chair. Sorry, Jane.
Yeah, okay, fine.
I have a question regarding the bedroom tax. Is that still ongoing or was it abolished?
That's not my area of expertise, I have to admit. I'll come back to you on that. I'll have a chat with Sandra Isaacs and she can respond to you directly on that, if that's okay, please. I think there is, I'm not sure it's called the bedroom tax anymore. We've moved to a universal credit situation, but I think the implications are similar.
Thanks so much. Thank you, Jane.
Okay, thanks, Walter. Yeah, Councillor Skibbins, Steve, you're on.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Very, very briefly, it's partially been covered, the question that I was going to ask, and I do have to leave for another meeting. But how do we enshrine the proportionality of building development, particularly if we look at the north of the county, and particularly in reference back to the previous report, where we have a reliance on the private sector? They will go with the affordability of the marketplace. So, for example, if land and available houses are cheaper, then they start to dictate. So how do we enshrine proportionality for our communities going forward? We don't want to end up with hundreds of HMOs, for example, along one high street.
No, and I think that's an interesting point, Councillor Scrivens, because as you know, Caerphilly Homes now is a developer in its own right. We have 18 apartments currently being built. Our next project will be the development of the former school up at Oakdale. And there are a number of other sites coming on train behind that. In terms of how we look at and consider your question, I would suggest to you that it's down to this council to disrupt the market. Basically, we now have the ability to actually look at perhaps what the council can do to intervene in these markets, particularly in the north. As you mentioned, we have a significant land portfolio within the HRA and the general fund, and I think our modus operandi as a council is not to develop for profit. Our modus operandi is actually to deliver according to need, and as a consequence of that, we may well be able to bring some sites forward in the north for the purposes, for regeneration, to create some of the vibrant communities, for example, that we're setting out that we want to deliver in this strategy, and to look at different ways of actually bringing that equity across the county borough so that there's not that continued focus in the south. There is more of a balance in terms of the accommodation provision that we can actually offer, and we have a key role to play in that, Councillor Scrivens, as a developer.
Thanks, Sarah. If I can just come back in, do you think this is an issue that needs to be referred back to our colleagues in planning to have some restrictions as they would over perhaps a range of commercial properties in one area?
I think that would be very, very difficult to bring in and to actually monitor and to enforce, Councillor Scrivens. We are duty bound by Welsh Government in terms of planning policy, and I think as a council, what we don't want to do is to shut down to development in certain areas. What we actually need to do is to promote the fact that Caerphilly is open for development, and we need to work closely with developers, with landowners, to encourage them to perhaps, test the market, disrupt the market, and do something different.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yeah, thank you, Steve. Councillor Mann, Colin.
Thanks, Chair. It mentions on, I think, page 42, great places. It touches on the question that Walter Williams asked earlier. I mean, the issue of people have to move out of communities because we get great places, we get great communities by stability and people not having to move when they don't want to. And I think I wasn't sure whether this came in the first report or this one or neither, but I think maybe our letting policy should place more emphasis on housing people locally when they have to move rather than offering accommodation maybe many miles away. And this is one of the biggest objections that I hear. I can't get anything local to me. I want to stay in the community that I've been born and brought up in, etc., etc. I've got one more, Chair, but maybe Jane could comment on that first.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right, Councillor Mann. I think we need to be providing an offer to, as I've said, first-time buyers or those people who want to get a foot on the ladder through intermediate housing, potentially through low-cost home ownership models. We're on target to buy 2 low-cost home ownership properties in the near future, and members will be seeing a low-cost home ownership policy coming through for discussion in the next 3 months. I think it's going to be down for scrutiny in February. So that's very much part of a change in the way in which we operate. We're also going to be looking at our common housing register and our common allocations policy, because we're very conscious that times have changed, particularly in the last 18 months, and people's needs have changed. And so I think, there will also be a review starting early in the new year that also members will be engaged in. I think our offer for older people, again, needs to change, and later living. We're looking at the site in Risca at the moment in Darren for a more innovative model, perhaps, again, changing the nature of what the council's offer of accommodation is to ensure that equity and to ensure that everybody has the opportunity to access a home. And we're also obviously working with our housing association partners. I mean, some of what Kerry touched upon in the beginning is very pertinent to this conversation. The fact is, we need to be offering accommodation that meets people's needs, whatever those needs actually are. And I think as a developer ourselves now, we're very focused on that. We're focused on working with our HAs to deliver that. And so hopefully over the course of the next few years, construction isn't instant, unfortunately. It takes a very long time to actually, get from basically a parcel of land to actually building homes and then letting those homes. But over the course of the next 5 years, the duration of this strategy certainly sets the direction for encouraging people to live, to work and to enjoy with the communities within Caerphilly County Borough, most definitely.
Okay, thanks for that. Again, on page 44, and you touched on this already, living where you can afford. That is the big crunch, isn't it? I mean, especially for anyone who's not on the housing ladder, whether they're young or middle-aged or whatever. It's virtually impossible. I mean, I know of a house, it happens to be in Walter Williams's ward, where I think it was bought certainly within the last 2 years for something like 90-odd thousand. It's had a certain amount of improvement, and it's been sold recently for 155,000. I mean, that is not exactly in the so-called prosperous south of the borough. It's absolutely ridiculous what people are expected to pay. And you mentioned, I think you mentioned 2 houses. Well, you've got to start somewhere for affordable. That's a bit like the 27 or 29 responses, 27 on it, responses we had to the thing. I mean, it's we've got to actually do far more than that. So really, and I know the authority can only do a certain amount, but we have got to do whatever we can to make housing affordable to people, and we've also got to make more efforts in making our own accommodation available. Oh, that's not my dog.
That's mine.
But I mean, one of the things, and I've exchanged a couple of messages with Lisa Phipps about the empty homes team. But one way we can make accommodation more available quickly is to reduce the void times on our accommodation. And the last time I checked, that seemed to be far too long as far as I was concerned. So that may or may not be something else you can respond to. I don't know, but it's this affordability and being able for people to actually get on to at least having a stake in their own home, which again contributes to stable communities, that I think we've got to concentrate on.
I think you're absolutely right. The low cost home ownership properties or the low cost home ownership offer has to be very much part now of our agenda moving forward. There are only 2 at the moment, but for example, if you look at the proposal that will be coming forward on the former Oakdale Comprehensive School site, we're talking there about 50% affordable homes, where 25% would be social rent and 25% would be LCHO. The other aspect to that, of course, is that the council would retain a stake in those properties or a share of those properties, which enables us then to actually maintain those properties moving forward and ensure that that offer continues and grows actually in the future. So 2 are a start, but there are certainly more to come, and the plan is that they will be part of our own development programme internally. The housing associations already offer an LCHO product, and those are advertised accordingly. We are going to be doing some work and some research on the desire for LCHO properties in the county borough, and I think that will very much inform our thinking moving forward. In terms of the voids, absolutely, the quicker we can turn around our voids, the better. And as you have touched upon, there is a new empty homes team within the private sector housing team, and they will now be very much focused on engaging with the private sector, with engaging with those landlords in order to repurpose some of these properties to meet an ever increasing need. You know, what is required here is a range of tools, actually. It's not just about new developments, it is very much about working with private sector landlords to bring those empty homes back into use in order to meet an ever increasing need. So the points you made are noted, Councillor Mann.
Could I come back very quickly, Chair? What is the latest on the RSL housing? Because quite a small development in my own ward. We were promised rent to buy. We were then told it wasn't possible. And the latest situation is there are a handful of properties in there which are now rent to buy. And this is something that Rob Goff and myself have been pestering people on for several years, you know, and we've now got a few rent to buy. And all sorts of people were blamed, but it is a very small proportion of the development.
Okay. Perhaps I can come back to you, Councillor Mann, on that. If you want to drop me an email, I can liaise then with the HA to provide you with an accurate response.
Yeah. It's the availability within the social housing, you know, whoever builds it, really. Okay, thanks, Jane. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you.
Colin, yes. Okay, fine. Mike, your hand's up. Yeah, do you want to come in now?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, well, I've noticed that there are no other hands up, so I'm hoping that this will actually be the last comment I made. And comments, they mainly are, Jane. I don't think you will need to answer any proper question, to be honest. And it comes back to the very start of the debate, where Councillor Ridgewell talked to us about Maslow's hierarchy of need. And of course, that hierarchy started off with a house, with somewhere to put your head at night, somewhere to get up in the morning and have a secure household that you could call your own for as long as you either rented it or you could afford to buy it and keep on buying it. And that the security of having that as part of a community around you, making it really, really helpful that you could properly be a part of that community, because you were in the same position as so many of your neighbours, that you had a place to live that you could call our own, because normally we're talking about families. But if you are a one-bedroom and you're living on your own, a place of your own. And this strategy that we need to make forward on for the next 5 years, hopefully will be the basis for the next 50 years for many people, to have a home that they enjoy living in, feel safe in, and feel safe that they can join in their community around them by having the same as so many of them. And I think that's where we're hoping to always move forward, is to give our residents security, safety, and a place that they can call their own within a larger community. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I think you say it all there, really. Yes, I don't see any more hands up, so it falls to me to round this off. I think from a personal level, and I'm sure I'm speaking for most members here tonight, I think we've all been, apart from being impressed, which we always are, hugely reassured, I think, Jane, and everybody within the teams, about where we are going, the ambitions that we've got and the steps we're taking, the measures that are in place, and the fact that I can feel confident that we're going to achieve most of these objectives, if not all of them, you know, which is absolutely superb. We're blessed with a very impressive team of professionals, and I'm delighted with that, and I'm sure everybody else would want to share that view too. So thank you very much indeed to all of you, those of you who have been speaking and those of you who haven't tonight. The last thing I have to do actually is just to actually go through the formalities of this. In fact, that the recommendations of this report are on page 3, and the intention of this was just to note the contents of this report. We haven't had any amendments, so the report is as it stands. So it just leaves it to me to say thank you everybody yet again and draw this meeting to a conclusion. Thank you all and good night.
Thank you, councillors. Thank you.